So I'm gonna read. So we're in the Korn Talmud Bavli, and we're gonna go through Tractate Tamid. So this is the tractate that deals with the temple service and what happens with it. So starting out, Parak 1. The Mishnah says, the priest would keep watch in 3 places in the temple courtyard in the honor of the temple, like guards in royal courtyards. In the chamber of Abtinas, which is the chamber where the incense was prepared, the Ketoret, and on the 2 sides of the northern section of the courtyard, in the chamber of the spark, where there was a small perpetual fire from which the fire of the altar would be lit if it went out, and in the chamber of the hearth, where there was also fire by which the priests would warm themselves when it was cold. In the chamber of Abtinas, in the chamber of the spark, there were upper stories, and the young priests who were not yet eligible to serve in the temple would keep watch there. In the chamber of the hearth, there was no upper story, as its ceiling was round like a cupola, and it was a large hall surrounded by rows of stone that protruded from the walls and that served as benches. The elders of the patrilineal priestly family that would serve in the temple the following day would sleep there, and the keys to the temple courtyard were in their possession. The young men of the priesthood who were old enough to serve in the temple would also sleep in the chamber of the hearth. They would not sleep on benches, but instead each of the priests would sleep with his garment on the ground. Furthermore, they would not sleep dressed in sacred vestments. Rather, they would remove them and fold them up, and then they would place the vestments on the floor beneath their heads and cover themselves with their own non-sacred garments. If a seminal omission befell one of the priests, rendering him ritually impure and unfit for service, he would leave the chamber of the hearth, and he would walk through the circuitous route that extended beneath the temple, as he could not pass through the temple courtyard due to his impurity. And there were lamps burning on this side and on that side of the passage. He would walk through the passage until he reached the chamber of immersion, and there was a fire burning there to warm the priests after they had immersed, and also a bathroom of honor, so that the priest could urinate before the immersion. This was the manifestation of its honor. If one found the door closed, he would know that there was a person there, and he would wait for him to exit before entering. If one found the door open, it was known that there was no person there, and he could enter. In this manner, the one using it was afforded privacy. After the priest descended, so notice that they're not calling out, hey, like knocking on the door, somebody there, right? Like we typically, that's kind of like the typical thing today is to knock on the bathroom door. But it's one of those things where like speech is very, very important, and this is being a sacred area, restraining themselves from just common everyday speech is the key thing there. So after the priest descended and immersed in the ritual bath, he ascended and dried himself with a towel and warmed himself opposite the fire. He then came back to the chamber of the hearth and sat with his brethren and priests until dawn, when the gates of the temple courtyard would be opened. He would then leave the temple and go on his way. Since the purification process of one who immerses is not complete until sunset, by rabbinic law, he could not remain in the temple during the daytime. Okay, so it says, the Mishnah describes the commencement of the daily service in the temple. Among the members of the priestly family who are to serve in the temple that day, whoever wants to remove the ashes from the altar rises early and immerses himself in a ritual bath as required by anyone who enters the temple courtyard. He must immerse before the appointed priest arrives, as the appointed priest oversees the lottery that determines which priests perform the various rites of the temple service. And the first of those lotteries determines who will be charged with the removal of the ashes. So at what time does the appointed priest arrive? The times of his arrival are not all the same. There are times that he comes at the call of the rooster, or he might come at an adjacent time, either before the call of the rooster or after. The appointed priest arrived at the chamber of the hearth, where the priests of the patrilineal family were assembled, and he knocked on the gate to alert them to open the gate for him. See, again, they're not using like speech as much. So when they opened the gate for him, he said to them, whoever immersed in the ritual bath may come and participate in the lottery. They then conducted the lottery, and whoever won that lottery won the privilege to perform the rite of the removal of the ashes. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah teaches that the priest would keep watch in 3 locations in the temple. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Abaye said that they derived from a verse, as the verse states, "And those that were to camp before the tabernacle eastward before the tent of meeting toward the sunrise were Moses and Aaron and his sons, keeping the watch of the sanctuary for the watch of the children of Israel, and the non-priest who came near was to be put to death." Numbers 3:38. The sages say in response, "Yes, we found in this verse that in general the Torah requires a watch to be kept. Furthermore, the verse indicates that it is the priests and Levites who are required to perform the watch, as it states the precedent of Moses, who was a Levite, and Aaron, who was a priest." But the Mishnah in Midot 1:1, so that's following this, it teaches the priests would keep watch in 3 places in the temple courtyard, and the Levites in 21 places. According to the Mishnah, the priests and Levites kept watch in different locations, whereas in the verse, the priests and Levites are written together, indicating that they kept watch at the same places. The sages say that this is what the verse is saying. "And those that were to camp before the tabernacle eastward before the tent of meeting toward the sunrise were Moses." Okay, indicating that the Levites keep watch. And then the verse states, with regard to the separate watch kept by the priest, Aaron and his sons keeping watch of the sanctuary. Furthermore, the verse indicates that Aaron keeps watch in one place and his sons keep watch in 2 other places, from which it is derived that the priests keep watch in 3 different places. The Gemara asks, from where is it derived the verse should be interpreted in this manner? So this is derived from the fact that it is written, "And those that were to camp were Moses." And those were to camp, etc., were Moses. And it is written separately, Aaron and his sons keeping watch. This indicates that those who are to camp and thereby keep watch are discrete, and those keeping watch are discrete. So like 2 separate, okay? And they perform different watches in separate places. The Gemara objects. One can say that all the priests keep watch in one place, that is discrete from the watches of the Levites, but not in 3 separate places. The Gemara explains, that possibility should not enter your mind, as the verse juxtaposes the watches of Moses and Aaron. This indicates that just as Moses keeps watch in one place discreetly, so too Aaron and his sons keep watch in one place discreetly. They do not keep watch together. Rav Ashi said that the halacha that the priests keep watch in 3 places is derived from the end of the verse, which states Moses and Aaron and his sons keeping watch. So shomerim, the watch, mishmeret of the sanctuary for the watch, so le mishmeret of the children of Israel. The verse uses 3 terms from the root shin mem resh, which means to watch, indicating that there should be 3 separate watches. The Mishnah teaches that the chamber of Avtinaz and the chamber of the spark were upper stories. Concerning this, a dilemma was raised before the sages. Were these halls actually upper stories? Or perhaps they were merely very tall, built upon pillars, and therefore were like upper stories? The Gemara explains, come in here. Tashama, a resolution, as we learned in the Mishnah, that discusses the 7 gates of the temple courtyard in Midot 1:5. So I want to say Midot is the tractate that deals with the structure of the temple. So it has extensive detail as to how the structure was, and all the different chambers, and all the different stories, and how certain walls were built, and where stuff was directioned and oriented. Okay, so there were 3 gates that were in the north, and the first of these was the gate of the spark. It was like a portico, an achsadra, and there was an upper story built atop it where the honor guard stood, with the priest watching from above in the upper story, and the Levites would keep watch from below, and the hall had an entrance toward the non-sacred area of the Temple Mount. This Mishnah indicates that the chamber of the spark was an actual upper story. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters that the priests and Levites kept watch in different stories derived? This is derived from a verse, as the sages taught in a Braita. The verse states that God said to Aaron, and your brethren also, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, you should bring near with you. And then they're emphasizing here that they may accompany you and serve you. Numbers 18:2. The verse is speaking to the Levites accompanying Aaron in that is Aaron's service of keeping watch in the temple, which is the only service performed by both priests and Levites, since the verse speaks of the watch of the Levites only as an accompaniment to the watch of the priest. The Levites do not keep watch from above like the priest, but only from below. Okay, the Braita asks, Do you say that the verse speaks of the Levites accompanying the priest in your service, of the priest keeping watch, or is it only stating that the Levites should accompany the priest through their own service of bearing the sacred vessels? The Braita explains that when the verse states, and they shall accompany you, and they shall keep watch of the tent of meeting, so that's Numbers 18:4, this is referring to keeping watch of all the temple's vessels and all its service, and consequently their own service of bearing the sacred vessels is already stated. How then do I realize the meaning in the previous verse that says, that they may accompany you and serve you, Numbers 18:2. The verse is speaking of the Levites accompanying the priest in your service, of the priest keeping watch in the temple. How so? The priests keep watch from above, and the Levites accompany them from below. Okay. With regard to the third place in which the priest would keep watch, the Mishnah states, in the chamber of the hearth. So the ceiling was round like a cupola, and it was a large hall. The Gemara asks, but was there only one watchman in the chamber of the hearth? And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Mishnah from Midot 1:7. The chamber of the hearth had two gates. One, so on the north side, was to the rampart, and one, which is on the south side, was open to the courtyard. Rabbi Yehuda said, this gate that was open to the courtyard has a small wicket in the door of the gate, through which the priest would enter in order to examine the courtyard and ensure that everything was in order. The chamber of the hearth had two gates, and therefore there should have been two watchmen there. Abaye said, since the two gates stood next to each other, that is, directly opposite one another, it was sufficient for them to be watched by one watchman, who could look here and look there. So, look both ways. So the Mishnah teaches that the chamber of the hearth was surrounded by rows of stone that protruded from the walls, and that served as benches. So think of a wall that was made up of stones, but the stones were kind of out of the wall, so they're kind of like benches. The Gemara asks, what are these rows of stone? Are they rows of chiseled stones by which the priest ascend to another row of stone where they could lie down? The Gemara asks, and would they split the stones in the process of building the temple? But isn't it written for the temple, when it was being built, was built of whole stone made ready at the quarry, and there was neither hammer nor axe nor tool or iron heard in the temple while it was being built? 1 Kings 6:7. Abaye said, it was prohibited to use iron implements to cut the stones only inside the temple area. In this case, it was permitted to have chiseled stones, such as the builders prepared the stones in another location. And the builders initially brought small stones and large stones, with which to build the temple, as it is written. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. 1 Kings 7:10. Accordingly, the larger stones were used for the lower tier, while the smaller stones were for the higher tier, forming protruding benches upon which the priest could sleep. The Mishnah teaches that the elders of the patrilineal family that would serve in the temple the following day would sleep there on the rows of stone. The Gemara asks, but why did the priest sleep on the stones? Let them bring beds into the chamber of the hearth. Abaye said, it is not proper to bring beds into the temple. So it's interesting, that they're sleeping basically, it seems like basically on the ground, which is a statement that we just recently read in Perkei Avot, sleep on the ground, right? The Mishnah further teaches that with regard to the young men of the priesthood, each of them would sleep with his garment on the ground. The Gemara asks, why is it there in the earlier Mishnah? The Tana calls them young, so Rovim, priest, whereas here the Tana calls them the young men of the priesthood. Priche kahuna. Is there a distinction between the different terms? The sages say yes, there is a distinction. There, with regard to the priests who keep watch in the chamber of Abtinas and in the chamber of the spark, the Mishnah is referring to priests who have not reached the age at which they are eligible to perform the temple service, and therefore the Tana calls them young priests. The older priests would not keep watch, as they preferred to perform the temple service. Here, with regard to the priests who sleep in the chamber of the hearth, in order to be ready to perform the morning rites, the Mishnah is referring to priests who have reached the age at which they are eligible to perform the temple service, and consequently the Tana calls them the young men of the priesthood. We learned in a Mishnah elsewhere, Midot 1:1, the priest would keep watch in 3 places in the temple courtyard, in the chamber of Abtinas, in the chamber of the spark, and in the chamber of the hearth. Okay, and the Levites would keep watch in 21 places as follows: 5 upon the 5 gates of the Temple Mount, 4 upon the 4 corners of the Temple Mount, within the wall surrounding the yard, and 4 upon the 4 corners. Sorry, did I say that right? Let me start over. And the Levites would keep watch in 21 places as follows: 5 upon the 5 gates of the Temple Mount, 4 upon the 4 corners of the Temple Mount, within the wall surrounding the Temple Mount, 5 upon the 5 gates of the Temple Courtyard, and 4 upon the 4 corners of the Temple Courtyard, outside the courtyard wall, surrounding the Temple Courtyard. 1 watch is observed in the chamber of the offering, where animals that had been checked for blemishes were held in readiness for sacrifice. 1 watch is kept in the chamber of the curtain, where the curtain separating the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies was woven. And finally, 1 watch is kept behind the chamber of the ark cover, in the area between the Holy of Holies and the western wall of the Temple Mount. With regard to these 21 places where the Levites keep watch, the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Rav Yehuda of Sora said, and some say that it was taught in a Braita. This is derived, as it is written, with regard to the Levites assigned by David to serve as gatekeepers upon the future construction of the temple. It says, eastward were 6 Levites, northward 4 Levites, southward 4 Levites, and for the Asupim 2 and 2. For the Parbar westward, 4 at the causeway and 2 at the Parbar. 1 Chronicles 26:17-18. So those 2 words were untranslated, and they say the commentaries note that the meaning of these 2 terms, Asupim and Parbar, is unclear. Some suggest they derive from the Osafim, or gather, and it refers to a place where the contributions to the temple treasury were collected. Alternatively, the term is from Nosafim, additional, and it is referring to the halls that were added to the temple after it was built. With regard to Parbar, the Gemara elsewhere explained that it was a small niche, 8 cubits high, between the Holy of Holies and the western wall of the temple courtyard. Some translations render Asupim as the storehouse and Parbar as the precinct. JPS. The Gemara objects, even if 2 locations are removed from the list, according to the verse, there are still 22 watches rather than 21. The Gemara explains that watch, which was situated at the Parbar, was composed of only 1 watchman, and as for the other, the Levite mentioned in the verse, it was merely to serve as company that went and sat with the watchman, due to the fact that the Parbar was situated on the outer side and was isolated from the other watches. Okay, the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the term at the Parbar, La Parbar? 1 Chronicles 26:18. Rabbi Bar Rav Shela said, this term is a contraction of 2 Aramaic words, and is like one who says toward the outside. Kalape bar. The Gemara presents an alternative answer to the question with regard to the verse. And if you wish, say instead that actually there are 24 watches, and the verse may be interpreted literally as it is written. 3 of them are the watches kept by the priest, and the remaining 21 are the watches kept by the Levites. The Gemara presents an alternative answer to the question with regard to the verse. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it written here in the verse that all 24 watches are kept by the Levites? The Gemara answers, this interpretation is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. As Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, in 24 places in the Bible, the priests are called Levites, and this is one of them. But the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, that kept the charge of the sanctuary, when the children of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near to me to serve me. Ezekiel 44:15. The Mishnah, Midot 1:1, teaches that 5 watches are kept upon the 5 gates of the Temple Mount, and 4 watches are kept upon the 4 corners of the Temple Mount, within the Temple Mount wall. 5 watches are kept upon the 5 gates of the Temple Courtyard, and 4 are kept upon the 4 corners of the Temple Courtyard, outside the courtyard wall, on the Temple Mount. The Gemara asks, what is different with regard to the Temple Mount that we perform the watch within the walls, and what is different with regard to the Temple Courtyard that we perform the watch outside its walls? The sages say with regard to the watch of the Temple Mount, if the watchman tires and wants to sit down, he may sit down, as it is permitted to sit on the Temple Mount. Therefore he may we say that the watch is kept within the Temple Mount. By contrast, if a watch is observed in the temple courtyard, even if the watchman tires and wants to sit down, he may not sit down. As the Master said, sitting in the temple courtyard is permitted only for kings of the house of David. Therefore we say that the watch is kept outside the walls of the temple courtyard, so that the watchman may sit down if he wishes. The Master said, Mar, above, that 5 watches are kept upon the 5 gates of the temple courtyard. The Gemara asked, but was it only 5 gates that were constructed in the walls of the temple courtyard? And the Gemara raises a contradiction from the Mishnah, Midot 1:4. There were 7 gates in the temple courtyard, 3 in the north, 3 in the south, and 1 in the east. Abaye said, although there are 7 gates, 2 of them, the gate of the chamber of the spark and the gate of the chamber of the hearth, did not require a watch of the Levites, as the priests kept watch there. Rava said the number of gates is a dispute between the Tanaim, as it is taught in the Braita. There must be no fewer than 13 treasurers and 7 trustees appointed over the temple administration. Rabbi Natan says there must be no fewer than 13 treasurers corresponding to the 13 gates. Remove from the total of 13 gates the 5 gates of the Temple Mount, and there remain 8 gates to the temple courtyard. Evidently, there is a Tana who said that there were 8 gates. There is a Tana who said that there were 7 gates, and there is also a Tana who said that there were 5 gates. The Mishnah teaches that the priest would not sleep dressed in the sacred vestments. Rather, they would remove them and place them beneath their heads. The Gemara infers from here that it is only sleep that is not permitted while a priest is dressed in the sacred vestments, lest he pass when during his sleep. With regard to the wearing such vestments, while the priests are awake and engaged in various activities and walking, they may walk about dressed in vestments even if they do not need to wear them for the temple service. You may therefore conclude from the Mishnah that it is permitted to derive benefit from priestly vestments. The sages say that this inference is incorrect. The same is true of walking, as even walking while wearing the vestments is not permitted. And the reason that the Tana teaches specifically that the priest would not sleep dressed in the vestments is due to the fact that the Tana wanted to teach the latter clause. They would remove them and fold them, and then they would place them beneath their heads. Since the latter clause is referring specifically to sleeping, the Tana teaches in the former clause as well that the priest would not sleep dressed in the vestments. The Gemara objects. But according to this interpretation, the Mishnah itself is difficult, as the Mishnah states, and they would place the priestly vestments beneath their heads as a cushion. One may conclude from this statement that it is permitted to derive benefit from priestly vestments. The Gemara rejects this interpretation, saying that the Mishnah means that they would place the vestments next to their heads, not literally beneath them. Rav Papa said, one may conclude from this interpretation of the Mishnah that if one places phylacteries by the side of his head while he sleeps, they are in a permitted place, and we are not concerned that perhaps he will roll over in his sleep and fall upon them, which would degrade the phylacteries. The Gemara comments, so too it is reasonable to say that the Mishnah permits the vestments to be placed only next to their heads, as if you say that the Mishnah permits the vestments to be placed literally beneath their heads. This is difficult. Granted that it is permitted to derive benefit from them, but one could derive that it is prohibited to sleep upon them due to the prohibition of diverse kinds of wool and linen. The priestly vestments contain both wool and linen and is a prohibited mixture in every other context. The Torah specifically permits the priest to wear them while they are performing the temple service, but this does not extend to using the vestments as a cushion while sleeping. Okay, the Gemara explains the difficulty. If one maintains that the Mishnah permits the priest to make the vestments beneath their heads, this works out well according to the one who said that the belt of the high priest is not the same as the belt of the ordinary priest. Although the belt of the high priest was made of both wool and linen, the belt of ordinary priest